I'm Joe Bauman, and this is part two of Prime Finance's primer on the valuation of financial contracts and standardizing valuation practices. I'm pleased to be joined again by Doug Summa, a former partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers and a Prime Finance expert. Much of Doug's career involved financial asset valuation, and he remains actively involved in this area as a director of the International Valuation Standards Council, better known by its initials, the IVSC. To get into it, Doug, during part one, you talked about why valuation standards are important to the market and market participants, in particular, the goals of consistency and transparency and comparability of various financial instruments. So let's start today with a question about how the IVSC standards relate to other regulations and other standards that participants might come across.
Joe, thank you, and thank you, Prime, for letting me talk about this. I appreciate the opportunity. So let me pick up sort of where we left off last time. You really talked about our mission, and I think it's important just to remind people really what the mission is of the IVSC, and then we can talk about how we actually are trying to accomplish this. You said it exactly right. We look for consistency, transparency, and comparability in valuation. And we're also here to foster professionalism to those who are performing valuations. And so that's our mission. So how do we do it? Well, we have standards, the IVSs, and some professional guidance, but this is really to talk about our professional standards. Our standards are principle-based, and one of the reasons that we have done that is that the world that we're trying to cover is incredibly difficult to describe in detailed rules. So we thought that the best way to go is to think about describe principles on how do you actually do a valuation. Our standards are designed to cover all asset and liabilities, including equity for those who want to think hard about this, and business valuation. As we do this, one thing that is also important just to highlight is that we've been adopted in 103 countries around the world. So our standards are widely recognized around the globe, and so that mission. And how we're trying to address it, we feel is very comparable. One thing I should highlight, though, about the IVSC is we don't have an enforcement mechanism. We rely on members, valuation professional organizations, and regulators to really enforce things. So we give guidance on that, but we do not have an enforcement mechanism. So let's talk a little bit about how our standards are broadly structured. We have standards that are called general standards. We have asset-specific standards. And those two, I'll talk more about them in a second, sort of exactly how they're set up. But our rules think about the world as sort of what should everyone do? What are somewhat unique aspects of how a given asset or liability needs to be valued? But also, we live in a real world, and so we also need to think about how our rules and make sure our rules are working with the legal system, the statutory and regulatory world in which we need to, that the values that people are looking for are applied to. The way our standards work is that it's sort of an all or nothing standard, a set of standards. You either comply with the IVSs or you don't. You can't cherry pick it. You can't do only parts of it. You either apply everything or nothing. So to have an IVS compliant value, you have to do everything. And as I said, but just to repeat this because I do think it's important, we're really complementary to other standards. The way I think about dividing up the world is we talk about how one should think about this. Typically, other regulators really talk about what it is. What's the purpose? So an example of that would be fair value. the accounting standards may not exactly tell you how you do that. We would tell you, how do you get to something that would be fair valued? So this is an overview of how our standards are actually set up. So I've mentioned these general standards and these asset standards. The general standards describe an end-to-end process that needs to be followed to be IVS compliant. This really comes from who does this, sort of this framework, how you think about how you're the way you're organized, through to how you describe what you're doing, what's the basis of value, what are you for what purpose are you doing this, um, different types of approaches, again, at a principled level, not at a detailed level. Then it talks about topics such as data and inputs, talks about valuation models, how, the key components to how many valuations are done. And last but not least is how it is memorialized. And when we think about this, it's how it is memorialized both by the person who is performing the value, what are the decisions that person has gone through, what's the basis for their decision, as well as how it is communicated. Thinking about how do we make sure that a user, however you want to define that person, whoever that person is, actually understands what they're getting. And so the general standards, as I said, really describe this end-to-end process and really tried to make it so that as a person goes through the valuation, they really have to think through, okay, have I thought it all the way through? Have I really thought about the controls, for example, that I need, or things like that? And so that's the level that we've written our general standards. We then get to the asset standards, and the asset standards are in three broad groups, which are the tangible and intangible assets, business valuation and intangibles, and financial instruments. That and an example of why we think you need to do this is, let me use a tangible asset example, is something like inspections, very specific thing that you need to think through. How do you actually think about an inspection, particularly now with new technology? Do you have to inspect a property? What does it mean? And so that's the level that we go to in the asset standards, really trying to give a little bit more specifics on things that are unique to one of those broad categories that I mentioned before. If there are not specific asset standards, what we have done is, what we expect is people to look to the general standards. So the general standards, we believe, describe at a reasonable level what you need to do. And then the asset standards really describe those specific things that are unique to a given asset class. So said differently, you have to comply with the general standards in any IVS compliant valuation, and then you look to the asset standards to determine if there are specific asset standards to which you also have to comply. So that's the way our standards are set up. So let me talk a little bit about how the IVSs are actually implemented and how they're really used. First off is in a few cases, not in that many cases, they are actually part of the law. There are actually laws that will refer to the IVSs. It is limited, but there are some. The second, this middle group, is really where we have an awful lot of more compliance on this. And we really, the two buckets are really, one is you have sets of rules where there is a reference to it. So it's not a law, it's a rule, it's an interpretation by some government body or regulatory body. Or in a large number of cases, what it is professional standards. Professional standards require that you use the IVSs. So where we talk about valuation professional organizations or VPOs, many of those VPOs refer to our standards as the requirements for what one of their members needs to do. And it has generally been in the area of tangible assets. There are also private firms who have picked up on this. So the example are the big four accounting firms, many of whom have adopted this or to do certain types of work. So that middle grouping is really where we have most of our activity, or most of the use cases are defined by those. We also do have other use cases that are happening where case law starts to refer to this, to these standards, and therefore it becomes more important to users to make sure that they comply. Frequently, IVSC members are brought in to talk about best practices as experts, such as prime finance, and so these standards are used to describe those, given the broad reach of our standards. Frequently we find that is a really valuable use of our standards. And last but not least, sometimes within a court hearing or some sort of negotiation over value, people will actually just prescribe this. And we're finding that is a way to be efficient at describing what you want done and what those minimum standards are. So people refer to our standards as whether it's a judge or whether it is in some other negotiation, just as an efficient, clear way to actually describe what they want done. And so this is really the world in which we do an awful lot of our work.
Great. And what does the future look like in this area, do you think?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because as we all know, the world is changing rapidly. Products change, processes change, uses are changing. And what we do is we go through a process every 3 years in which we reach out to stakeholders and find out what they think we should be spending our time on going forward. And we think we just completed one of these agenda consults, and we think we actually have things that make a lot of sense to us and our stakeholders that we're really going to focus in on. So topics such as new asset and liability types, particularly digital assets, crypto, however, all of the shades of this are clearly something that people would like to get a little bit more understanding of how we think evaluation should be performed. Technology is obviously a big issue, not to overstate it, but to really stress that we see that, how AI is impacting, large language models are impacting what we're doing. All of this is a big focus for our group and for the IVSC in terms of trying to, and our stakeholders in terms of really trying to think about that. We think one of the challenges is that there may be certain valuation approaches which really don't have much human interaction, not much judgment in it, and that's what we're trying to really calibrate our thinking on. Another thing is the ongoing use of specialists and service providers, particularly as more things need to be valued, broader things need to be valued. How much reliance can someone put onto those organizations? How do you get comfortable with them? Big topic for us. And last but not least is sustainability. We continue to think about how one thinks about measurement of things like ESG. So these are the types of topics these are the topics that we're really focusing in on. But I should just stress one more quick thing is that our standards, even if we don't have something specific on, let's say, a certain type of crypto, our standards are really designed to address that without necessarily talking about all of the subtleties or some of the subtleties as you can in principle-based standards. But we do believe that our general standards, that process that we talked about, is applicable even if we don't have these specific standards. So we do believe that we've answered that first set of needs, which is around the consistency, transparency, and comparability in the general standards. But we do also appreciate that we need to drill down further. So let me just wrap up briefly. What I'm hoping I've left you with is a notion that the IVSs do cover all assets and liabilities, and that we have a good end-to-end process described and the types of things that are appropriate, that are reasonable to perform. We do also think, however, that the world is evolving, and we acknowledge, maybe we don't think, we acknowledge that the world is evolving. And therefore, we need to really think about how do we continue to give guidance, provide standards that will allow people to do an appropriate amount of work around valuing new assets, dealing with new processes, and thinking about new use cases. So that's really what we do, and that's how and the IVSs are how we actually address those.
That's great. Doug, maybe one final question from me would be if our listeners, if one wants to find out more about these standards or about the IVSC, what's the easiest place to find information?
So our website is the IVSC.org, and that is where you can read more about the organization. You can actually get our standards. Our standards are online and accessible, so you can get them there.
Great, thank you. So I want to again thank Doug for educating us all in an area that may not get a lot of attention until there are disagreements that need to be resolved in the marketplace. And hopefully with this work, some of those disagreements will never really see the light of day. We'll be able to resolve issues through the use of standards. Again, thanks to Doug for the time he has put in educating us in this area, and see you all again.
Thank you for letting me do this.